Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, with some tips on how to outsnot the classical music snobs. You know, we all run into them, these people who are so pretentious because they think they know a little something about pieces that have a certain mystique, and they're trying to impress you either with their devotion to the cause or the obscurity of their knowledge. And so I have half a dozen little examples here that you can take with you and stick in your pocket and have ready for when you encounter these people, and really just need to stop the conversation before it gets too annoying. So we have to begin where we always begin in the classical music snot world, and that's with Wagner and the Wagnerians, because they were the original classical music cult people. And the more you study history, and I'm a European historian by training. That's where I have my actual academic degrees, and I taught European history at the college level for a bit. And when you research this stuff and you look at what these people were doing and what they were saying, and oh my God, a more annoying bunch you just can't imagine. Never mind the fact that they were all proto-Nazis and whatnot. I mean, even if not for that, they would have been as annoying as hell. I mean, they have. If you read, like, for example, a Liszt biography, you have this picture of all of them going to his house in Switzerland, Triebschen or whatever it was called, because he wasn't allowed in Germany. He was going to be arrested as a political, refugee. And he was writing the poem of the Ring and die Walküre, and all these people standing around as he's reading the poem. There's no music yet, mind you. This is just the poetry. And they're all just looking at him with like adoration on their faces, going, "Oh, Richard, it's even more exquisite than our puny minds could ever have imagined." And Richard saying, "Oh, you're even punier than you think you are." And they saying, "Oh, yes, abuse us more, Richard." I mean, oh, God, it was horrible. I mean, these people were just nuts, absolutely nuts. So the Wagnerians were just as nuts. And, of course, the Wagner work that is really going to get your juices flowing. I mean, there are a bunch, let's face it, right? There's The Ring, which is, the great mythological thingy. And then there's Tristan, which is the one where, tenors usually have heart attacks and drop dead before it's over. But the Wagnerian snot piece is Parsifal, of course, because it's transcendental and it has religious mysticism along with all of the other folderol that goes with it. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Parsifal's music is glorious. It's gorgeous music. Gorgeous music. The story is just horrible and silly and ridiculous. But if somebody starts berating you with their Parsifal nonsense, their Parsifal persiflage, if you want to call it that, how they have all 27 Knappertsbusch Parsifals and all that stuff on 48 CDs and whatnot, all you have to do is say to them, "Yes, but what about Pfitzner's Palestrina?" Because Palestrina is, well, my colleague Bob Levine sort of describes it best. He says it's Parsifal without the laughs. It's even more serious, more turgid, more Germanically sententious than Wagner, because Pfitzner was, as a composer, was almost a total failure, of course, but the failure was all one of imagination, not one of pretense. He was as pretentious as anybody who ever existed, and who was totally convinced of his own innate superiority, and he even talked sort of Bruno Walter into it, which is kind of amazing. But Palestrina is his masterpiece, and it is endless, absolutely endless, and it has one good tune in it, which isn't by Pfitzner, it's by Palestrina. It's the Pope Marcellus Mass, which is sort of stuck into it because that's part of the plot, how Palestrina saved music for the church. And oh my goodness, Believe me, tell the Wagnerians that you are a big fan of Pfitzner's Palestrina, and they will immediately change the subject. So that's number one. Number two, well, this is a little bit similar, only this is the British Isles version of the Palestrina people. The British Isles version of the Palestrina people is the Dream of Gerontius sect. Now, Gerontius is another work which has beautiful music, lovely music, and just the most awful words that you could possibly imagine. The libretto is just terrible. And some of you have even criticized me because you say, oh, I never talk about Gerontius without talking about how horrible the words are. Well, yes, that's true, because they are absolutely dreadful. But it's more than that, because it's not just Gerontius. It's that whole English Victorian oratorio tradition and the English choral tradition, and those people who are just so impressed with themselves, even though the music is just enough to make you want to slit your wrists half the time. So yes, there are these English choral music snobs and American choral music snobs. I mean, I knew a conductor who lived for nothing but to conduct The Dream of Gerontius and other fabulous Victorian masterpieces, and his other favorite was Parsifal, by the way. So we know where we're coming from, right? But if somebody is getting to you about the English oratorio tradition, even going back to big Handel festivals and whatnot, there is an answer. The answer is yes. But what about Felix Draeseke's Christus? Because English people can't imagine an oratorio tradition outside of England, nor can they imagine one that is even more sententious and dreary than their own. But there is Christus, which is by Draeseke. Now, Felix Draeseke, we've talked about a little, actually. He was really a good composer, for the most part, and he wrote 4 symphonies, and he was actually best writing funny music. His 2nd symphony has some delicious comical moments, and his 4th symphony is called the Comica, the comical symphony, which is why nobody ever pays any attention to it. They only pay attention to the 3rd symphony, which is called the Tragica. That's the one Brahms liked, because they're German. They have to like the tragic. Well, Draeseke wrote a 3-part Wagnerian oratorio called Christus. And it is absolutely interminable and heavyweight and sanctimonious. And oh my God, it's enough to, well, we've already talked about, different ways you can do yourself in listening to this music. But Draeseke, I guarantee, will stop any British choral fan dead in their tracks. So have it ready. Just remember, well, what about Draeseke's Christus? What do you think of that? Take that, you Gerontius beings. So number 3 is, of course, the Furtwängler cult. Now, dealing with the Furtwängler cult is much easier than you might think, because at heart, the Furtwängler cult knows that he wasn't very good at most things, and they hide that by talking about how he really intentionally wasn't very good. That he was so nervous because the Nazis were breathing down his back, and he deliberately sabotaged the Nazi Beethoven Ninth. It was just awful because it was he was trying to demonstrate just how awful Germany was then, or because he believed that rhythmic exactitude was a bad thing and he didn't care. And you just have, they're all apologists, terrible apologists for the guy's failings. They really are. But if you run into a Furtwängler cult member, you just have to look at them straight in the eye and say, well, what about Oswald Kabasta? Oh, here he is. Here's Oswald. That's Oswald Kabasta up there. Oswald Kabasta was a German conductor who was an enthusiastic Nazi, marvelously enthusiastic Nazi, who in 1946, after having been dismissed from his various posts for being a Nazi, committed suicide. So he was really authentic. He really was. I mean, he did himself in. But the point about Oswald Kabasta is that he left a small selection of radio recordings dating from the war period, and they included some Bruckner. There's like a Bruckner Fourth, and there's a Dvorak New World Symphony. And this Dvorak New World Symphony was supposed to be so marvelous, it was mistaken for Furtwängler himself. It was, for 10 minutes. And then they figured out it was really Oswald Kabasta. Is it a great New World Symphony? No. Is anything that he did necessary? No. Absolutely not. But it's historical. It's okay. It sounds pretty dim. It sounds like Furtwängler actually on a good day most of the time. So you can absolutely confound your Furtwänglerian by simply mentioning the fact that, well, in your opinion, the true great, especially during the Nazi period, was Oswald Kabasta. And that will probably put them in their place, at least in time for you to beat a hasty retreat and, like, catch a train or get in the car and drive away or do whatever you were going to do. So that's very handy. After the Furtwängler cult, well, there are the piano wackos. The piano wackos are interesting. They're always the ones who are going to tell you that all of the great pianists that were recorded by the major labels really suck. And the only people that matter are these unknown artists that they happen to know about because they saw them in a competition or they made a YouTube video or they did something. And they're the real artists. The Rubinsteins, the Horowitzes, the Arals, the Argeriches, they're just nothing. They're all fakes and phonies. And besides, they're only playing the same old repertoire over and over and over again. And there's nothing for that you can say about how much you love piano music or who you love that they're going to take seriously. They're going to dismiss it all. So once it's all been dismissed by them, you just look them straight in the eye and you say, well, have you heard Sorabji's Sequentia Cyclica? Well, now, Sorabji is the cult composer's cult composer. Sorabji was a British composer of Indian descent who was a complete misanthrope and who banned performances of all of his music, which, not as if anyone was lining up to hear it, mind you. He did it because some people played it. They did it very badly. One of the reasons they did it very badly is because his notation was so sloppy and confusing, no one could figure out what he wanted. But he wrote these enormously crazy piano pieces, mostly with pretentious Latin titles. The most famous of them is the Opus Clavicembolisticum. But that is nothing. He also wrote 100 transcendental etudes, which have been recorded by Biss. But that's all nothing compared to the Sequentia Cyclica. This is the full piece. The title here is Sequentia Cyclica Super Dies Irae ex Missa pro Defunctis, which means a cyclic sequence based on the Dies Irae tune, and the Dies Irae, da 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 dum bum bum. It's the end of the Symphonie Fantastique. Berlioz uses it, and Liszt used it in the Totentanz, and it's one of the most. Rachmaninoff used it in everything. It's one of the most famous tunes in all of Western civilization, and it is the Day of Judgment, Day of Wrath from the Requiem Mass, the Missa pro Defunctis, the Mass for the Dead. So that's what this means. A cyclical sequence of variations, in this case, on the Dies Irae theme from the Mass for the Dead. And this consists of, the theme plus 27 variations, but this is not just 27 variations, because these 27 variations take 8 hours to play. It's on this 7-disc set, amazingly performed by Jonathan Powell at the piano. This is on Piano Classics, by the way. And it's completely insane. At the center, variation 22 is a Passacaglia with 100 variations. That's just one of the variations. As a subset of the variations, a Passacaglia being, a series of variations over a repeated bass, a bass line. And then the finale, the last variation, variation 27 here, is a Fuga quintuplice, a 5-voiced fugue. And, Sorabji's harmony is just chromatic sludge. It sounds like mud. It really does. And so you've got 8 hours of chromatic sludge mud based on the Dies Irae, which even the most avid pianophile is going to be aghast with admiration that you even know that it exists. But beyond knowing that it exists, you have to do a little. You have to be creative and lie a little bit. Tell them that you've played it. Just tell them. Tell them you were sitting around in your drawing room, idly whittling away at the ivories, and you saw the score of the Sorabji Sequentius Cyclica, and you spend a few days just playing through it for your own enjoyment. See what happens. Get back to me on that. I'm very curious to find out. So after that, there are the avant-garde chamber music people, the Elliott Carter Quartet fans. Now, Elliott Carter wrote 5-string quartets, and they are considered to be among the great masterpieces of avant-garde 20th century chamber music. I would not deny that. They are amazing works conceptually. They are very difficult works to listen to. And you know, if you want to like have at it, go ahead. You know, Carter liked complexity for its own sake. And one of the things he does, for example, in these quartets is he writes simultaneous movements. They play in their own rhythm, in their own time, and they have pauses that don't occur where the music actually breaks off, and they all go simultaneously, and it's an ordeal. It's a real ordeal to listen to. But some people claim to love them, and they're certainly entitled to love them. That's not a problem. I have the scores. I have them sitting right over there. So I have done my best to study them and at least be acquainted with them, because everybody says that you have a moral obligation to do so. So I have done my duty. But if people start jumping on you about the joys of hideously atonal, incredibly difficult, abstruse chamber music, you just look them straight in the eye and you say, oh yes, but I do so miss the intensity of the Michael Gielan string quartet. Now, the Michael Gielan string quartet, he's a composer too, you know, the conductor, Michael Gielan, he was a composer, a devoted atonal 20th century avant-garde composer of just appallingly bad sounding music. And his string quartet was recorded by the La Salle Quartet for Deutsche Grammophon. And it's based on a poem by Baudelaire, I think, about the decomposing corpse of a dead swan. Yes, and it's all downhill from there. And the music, it is what those people are doing to their instruments. I just don't want to know. It sounds like it should be illegal. The noises coming from these people. Absolutely fabulous. And it makes Elliott Carter sound like Vivaldi, comparatively speaking. So you can very, very easily out-avant the avant-garde people by discussing your incredible fidelity to the Michael Gielan string quartet, and what's more, how the music is so evocative of the putrefying corpse of the dead swan that it purports to describe. So that's that one. But last but not least, you know who we have to deal with. We have to deal with the Bruckner people. We must. And it's very difficult to deal with the Bruckner people because, first of all, you're only talking about one composer, and most people kind of like him, and, you know, and not only that, but the Bruckner people know everything about this guy, every version, every note, everything he did, everything he said, everything he ate, everything he, you know, the whole deal, every performance of everything. There's a website dedicated to it. It's quite difficult. But there is somebody that you can talk about. And again, it may require a little bit of sort of strategic stretching of the truth, but only a little bit. Because a good lie always has a kernel of truth in it, right? I mean, and this one definitely does. Tell them that you have broadcast tapes from German radio of a complete Bruckner cycle by Gerhard Pfluger. That's his name, Gerhard Pfluger. Now, Gerhard Pfluger was like so obscure, I don't even have a picture of him. He died in 1991, actually, but boy, did he know how to pick 'em. He was an enthusiastic member of the Nazi Party in 1940, or at least that's when he joined. And then after the war, he did get denazified, and he wound up in East Germany, where in 1946 he became an enthusiastic member of the East German Communist Party, where, his political affiliations were really quite something. And he became an honored artist of the German Democratic Republic. But the reason I found Gerhard Pfluger in my day is that, when I was starting out listening to records, I would I was a kid. I was like cutting lawns. I had no money. So I would go to Goodwill in Milford, Connecticut. I would bicycle downtown. Goodwill was right next to the fire station in those days on New Haven Avenue. And it's moved since then to the Post Road, but it used to be right there. And for some reason, I've never understood. They had this wild record collection. They had all kinds of stuff. I got like all the Václav Talik and Karl Shana Dvorak symphonies on Superphone and things. How that got to Milford, I don't know. But Gerhard Pfluger did one of the early recordings of Bruckner's Fifth Symphony on Urania, the Urania label. He recorded for Urania, or they stole it from East Germany and published it in the West. I don't know. But it was a wonderful looking set. I mean, I saw this thing. It said Bruckner Symphony No. 5. I was, very young. I was just on my bike, and it was like 10 cents, and it came in this big package with a wooden spine with a big, long, complicated program note at the front. And over the front was a quotation saying, "I have dedicated my life to Anton Bruckner." Signed, Gerhard Pfluger. Well, I played this thing and I was just like, what the hell is this? It was Bruckner's Fifth. It was, I was 8, I had my little close and play record player, but I knew Gerhard Pfluger. So after that, I spent my life looking to see who the hell Gerhard Pfluger was. Well, he was apparently a Bruckner guy. And like I said, he was an ex-Nazi communist who survived 2 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall. I'll bet he was so touched by that particular turn of events. Wasn't a bad Bruckner Fifth, though, thinking back on it, because I owned it for many, many years. And if you really want to set the Brucknerians on their ear, talk to them about the missing complete Gerhard Pfluger Bruckner cycle, and you will send them scurrying to their databases looking for the source material. I guarantee you it won't fail. So those are just six suggestions on how you can prove yourself to be the biggest snot in the room, if that's what you need to do. I advise you not to do this as a matter of course. This is only a defensive weapon. It's a defensive tactic. You don't want to have the reputation of really being like these people, but you do want to have some handy tools for the purpose of deflection, just to be able to make your escape or get out of the conversation, and I think that will work tremendously well. In fact, I'm sure it will. These are just my suggestions, and I offer them to you in the spirit of friendship and unity and joy in the world of classical music. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.